10th CBSE Biology, Chapter Reproduction. In this video, you will learn sexual reproduction in flowering plants, know the difference between unisexual and bisexual flowers, self-pollination and cross-pollination, and also understand fertilization and development in flowering plants. Flowering plants. Flowering plants, which are also known as angiosperms, are those group of plants which produce seeds in an enclosure. So those are the plants which produce seeds in an enclosure, and the seed which is inside an enclosure is called fruit. All the fruits which we eat come from angiosperms. Not only the fruits but also the vegetables, the grains, the pulses, all these are the products of angiosperm plants. Hence, angiosperms occupy a central role in the world vegetation. Recall that angiosperms have flowers as the reproductive organs, and the flowers eventually get transformed into fruit. This is a common observation. But we always wondered how this was possible. It was not less than a miracle. Now, in this video, let us understand how this miracle happens. Flowers are the reproductive organs of angiosperms. We already know this. Flowers can be of two types: unisexual flower and bisexual flowers. Unisexual flowers are those in which male and female flowers are separate, whereas a bisexual flower is one which has male and female reproductive parts within the same flower. So such flowers are called bisexual flowers. So bisexual flowers are those flowers in which male and female reproductive parts are within the same flower, and if the male and the female flowers are separate, we call them as unisexual flowers. Now let us see some examples. Now observe the flower carefully. Here is the stigma. You can see style here. Anthers, filament, together called as stamen. Coming down you can see the receptacle, and here you can see ovary. Make a guess whether it's a bisexual or a unisexual flower. It is a bisexual flower because it has got both male and female reproductive parts in it. So the female reproductive parts are stigma, style and ovary, which are together called as carpel. Anther and filament together forms a stamen, which is a male reproductive part. So the same flower has both male and female reproductive parts in it. Now moving on. So here is an example for unisexual flower, the papaya flowers. We can clearly see the difference in their structure. Watermelon flowers, another example. The difference becomes very obvious in this case. We can see the bulged ovary in the female flower. So far we understood that flowers are the reproductive organs of angiosperms. And we also understood that flowers can be unisexual with male and female flowers being separate, or they can be bisexual with male and female reproductive organs in the same flower, like for example a hibiscus flower. Now let us move on and understand how the flowers become fruit. The transformation of flower to fruit involves two important stages. The first stage is pollination, and the second stage is fertilization and development. These are the two stages which are involved in the transformation of flower to fruit. So the first stage is pollination. Pollination is a process in which the pollen from the stamens is transferred to the stigma of the flower. So pollination is a process of transfer of pollen, the pollen grains from stamen to stigma. Observe here, pollen grains are present in the anther of the stamens. When the word comes stamen here, it clearly indicates that it is a male reproductive part. So here is the male gamete. Pollen grains are nothing but the male gametes. So the stigma is a part of female reproductive organ. The stamens bear anthers. Anthers have pollen grains in them, and the pollen grains are transferred to the stigma, which are the female reproductive part. So this transfer of pollen grains from stamens to stigma is called as pollination, and it is a first step in the fruit production or seed production. Recall that sexual reproduction is nothing but the union of male and female gametes. So the flower already has male and female reproductive parts, and hence it produces the male and female reproductive cells, which are nothing but gametes. So the gametes are present in stamens as pollen grains and in stigma as ovules. Now the pollen has to get transferred from the anthers to the stigma. This process of transfer is called as pollination. And if the pollination happens within the same flower, then it is called self-pollination. And if the pollination occurs between the flowers of two different plants, then it is called as cross-pollination. Now let us understand what happens after pollination. Here you can see it's a pollen grain here. Each pollen grain has two male gametes or sperms. So when the pollen grain gets attached to the stigma, it develops the pollen tubes within which the sperms travel. You can see here the pollen tube is attached to the ovules. Now the sperms travel through the pollen tube and enter the ovules. Within the ovule we find egg nucleus as well as the polar nuclei. The two sperms fertilize the egg nucleus, the first fertilization, and also the polar nuclei, the second fertilization. So it is the double fertilization in case of plants. So the first fertilization is with the egg nucleus and the second fertilization is with the polar nuclei. The egg nucleus turns into a zygote after fertilization. This zygote enters into multiple divisions and becomes an embryo from which the plant develops. Whereas the polar nucleus becomes the endosperm nucleus after fertilization and develops into an endosperm tissue. This endosperm tissue is nothing but the nutritive tissue for the growing plant, and also a seed coat is developed for the protection of embryo. The ovaries which had all this turns into a fruit after fertilization. This is how a flower transforms itself into a fruit after fertilization. In this video, you understood the sexual reproduction in flowering plants and also the difference between unisexual and bisexual flowers, self-pollination and cross-pollination, and the fertilization and development in flowering plants.